Easy.
Is this the same article? So confusing. It's not over.
All right, why don't we get started? Thanks everyone for coming. We greatly appreciate it. It's my honor and privilege to welcome Chairman Gooch, who has come to speak with us today. Senator Steve Gooch was elected to the Georgia State Senate in 2010. Senator Gooch represents the 51st District, which includes Dawson, Fannin, Gilmore, Lumpkin, Union, and White counties, and also parts of Forsyth and Pickens counties. Senator Gooch serves as the Secretary of the Majority Caucus of the Georgia State Senate and as Chairman of the State Transportation Committee. Senator Gooch is also Vice Chair of the Economic Development Committee and member to the Natural Resource and Environmental Appropriations Committees. He is the ex officio to the Rules Committee as well. In 2011, Governor Deal appointed Senator Gooch to the Martok Committee. Senator Gooch graduated from North Georgia College and State University, where he earned his bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's degree in public administration. He currently serves as executive director for the Development Authority in Lumpkin County. He served as a DOT board member, the Lumpkin County Sole Commissioner, and as the Lumpkin County Board of Commissioners Chairman prior to being elected to the Georgia State Senate. Senator Gooch and his wife Shannon also have three children, Samuel, Seth, and Sawyer. It's my great honor to welcome Senator Gooch. I know I first met probably a year and a half or 2 years ago with the Senator as the Transportation Commissioner, which is very exciting. So we really worked very hard to try to get the Chairman, to come visit us so that the students and the other folks at the Georgia Tech Committee could really see how things happen, how things get done. Because these are the folks who, we have grand ideas. If you don't get them with us, then you're not going anywhere. So we're really excited about this. Chairman Roberts does send his regrets. He was not able to make it today. And I think, Dean, you briefly wanted to make a quick statement. Sure. Dean Sheehan, the VP for Government Relations for Georgia Tech.
Right. Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to mention on behalf of the Georgia Tech administration how grateful we are to have a leader like Senator Gooch to come from Dahlonega, drive down here today to share his time with us. We have had a great working relationship with Senator Gooch and his team in the state Senate. Georgia Tech has been very fortunate to have leaders that care about what's going on at places like Georgia Tech and in the kinds of fields of study that you're engaged in, so we can continue to be leaders in this particular field. Of course, see my friend Natalie Dale's over here with DOT, and others are here from the DOT, and with Commissioner Golden and with Deputy Commissioner Todd Long. We have a great legacy of Georgia Tech alumni who are leaders in the transportation space for our state. So that's just a fantastic legacy for Georgia Tech. But it's a real treat today to have Senator Gooch here again. Like I say, he has had an open door for us in the state capitol when President Peterson is in the capitol and has a particular priority item that we would like to share or address or to discuss. Senator Gooch is among the first to say, come on in and let's talk about that and sort of listen and learn as to what Georgia Tech is trying to accomplish. So we appreciate that. I have to mention this too, we are always in the recruiting space, right? Trying to look for the best and brightest students to be future students at Georgia Tech. So last year we were delighted to host his son's 5th grade class from Dahlonega here for a visit to Tech. And so we're always looking for those opportunities, so send us some more, please.
Just trying to plant seeds.
Amen. Send us some more from your area of the state. So I just wanted to share that with you from President Peterson's office and our Office of Government Relations here at Tech. You've got a great friend here, an advocate for what's going on, and again, in the field of study that you're engaged in. And so let's welcome our friend, Senator Steve Gooch.
Good morning. All right, how many DOT people do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. See, it really does take a lot of people to get the job done. Heard jokes all your life. How many DOT employees does it take to clean out a culvert and all that? Just a joke, Natalie. Don't get upset. Natalie worked with us over at the Senate for a couple of years when I first got there, and then she moved over to DOT because she knew how great the DOT was. But it was a pleasure for me to be on the board, and I enjoyed every minute of it. And working with Todd Long, and gosh, I can go back 14 years when I was a county commissioner in Lumpkin County. I worked with the commissioners back then. We have Harold Lennon, Larry Dent. They've all come and gone and retired, living the dream now, I guess. But I want to talk to you a little bit about Georgia's transportation this morning. And before I start, let me say I'm not wearing red and black. I know there's a lot of people in Georgia that talk about UGA. I'm not a UGA graduate. I graduated up in Dahlonega at North Georgia College, so I'm wearing a little bit of blue. I don't have any gold on, but I'm wearing my blue today. My good friend Frank Gann, though, however, and Carly knows who I'm talking about, he was my roommate and office mate over at the Senate. He's a big UGA guy. He graduated, and he's always talking about how he graduated with an engineering degree at the University of Georgia. And I asked him, I said, how did you graduate with an engineering degree from the University of Georgia? I didn't know they had engineering over there. He said, oh, yes, ag engineering. So for 4 years, I've asked him, what is an ag engineer? And I can't really get a good definition of it. So I think Georgia Tech has the market on engineering. So the DOT has a couple hundred engineers working for them, and I think primarily they come from Georgia Tech. So we rely heavily on Georgia Tech and your students here, and we're grateful for that. Very, very smart people that are designing state-of-the-art transportation systems in Georgia. I've got a couple facts I want to share with you. I don't have the PowerPoint, but I want to look at some notes and just give you a little bit of background on what transportation means to us in the General Assembly in Georgia and to the almost 10 million people in our state. As you know, when you're driving through Atlanta every morning, it's a difficult time to get through town. So that's probably our biggest priority right now is how do we manage the 10 million people in Georgia coming and going to work, coming through the state, commerce, trucks, all the traffic that's trying to get onto our roads every day. So that's a big issue. We have the 10th largest road system in the nation. Over 18,000 centerline miles of state routes and interstates that the DOT is responsible for. That doesn't count all your side streets and your city and county roads. That's just major state routes. So that's a big task. 14,000, almost 15,000 bridge structures in the state that the DOT is responsible for. 4,500 miles of main line and short line railroad. So when you think about transportation, we're not just talking about highways, we're talking about trains as well. We have the busiest airport in the world, Hartsfield International Airport, just down the road here. The #1 busiest airport in the world. And we continue to earn that based on the number of people flying in and out every day. We have the 4th busiest container port in the U.S. down in Savannah and Brunswick. It's the fastest growing port on the East Coast now, and we have exciting news this year. We've just gotten our final funding from the feds for our deepening project. If you've heard about the Savannah port, we're going to deepen that river channel about 5 feet. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's about a 26-mile channel. We've got to deepen it 5 feet. It's going to cost $650 to $700 million. And so that's something that's been in the works for over a decade. We finally got the federal government to give us the money and the permits. The state has about $250 million in that as well. We've invested your dollars here in Georgia for that project. And what's so important is because the Panama Canal is about to finish construction of their new canals. I went down there about a month ago and toured the new canals that are being built. And once the new Panama Canal is open, they're going to allow bigger ships to come through the canal that can't get through there today. And what that means to Georgia is that those ships will hopefully come up the East Coast and they'll come to the closest port they can get into to unload their goods. And we hope Savannah's going to be their choice. So we're working hard to get those ships into Georgia because it's going to mean hundreds of thousands of jobs for our citizens. Transportation again with the ports, bringing those goods in. Once you get them off the ship, you got to truck them into Georgia and through Georgia and into the southeast, or you put them on rail and you get them out of the state as quickly and as efficiently as you can. DOT also has 128 transit providers around the state, not just MARTA, not just Greta, but you see little buses around rural areas. Those are funded through the feds and through the state. The DOT manages all those contracts as well. And in addition to the Hartsfield International Airport, we also have 103 general aviation airports around the state. So just about everywhere you go in your communities, wherever you're from, you're living pretty close to some kind of an airport, whether it's a small municipal airport, private runways, or maybe even a regional airport like Gainesville. Lee Gilmer Airport in Gainesville is a very busy airport. So it's a very complex transportation system. We have our challenges. Our main challenge right now is funding. I believe we have the best equipment, we have the best technology, and the best manpower we can get to get the job done. And they know what needs to be done, but we have a lack of funding in our state, and that's one of the challenges that we're facing this year in the General Assembly. So my job as the chairman of transportation is not to go out and build roads. It's not to tell the DOT where we need to put more interchanges or more traffic lights. Our job is a policy position. We actually look at how do we help deliver the goods the best cost we can to the taxpayer, and how can we help find the funding to move our transportation systems into the next generation. And so that's what we've been doing all summer. We have a study committee that's been formed, which was an act of the legislature this past spring. We've created the study committee between the House and the Senate, and we've gone all over the state. We started here in Atlanta, we've gone to Columbus, we've gone to Tifton, Augusta, Savannah, Macon. Next week, we're going to finish our study committee. We're going to be in Blue Ridge on Wednesday, and then we're going to finish up on Thursday in Rome, Georgia. And so what we're doing is we're asking all of our local citizens and our community leaders, our county commissioners and city council members, what are your needs in Georgia? What are your needs in your communities as far as transportation goes? And how do we best deliver the funding to get that done? And so we've gotten a lot of feedback. We know our funding system is inadequate right now. I can share some other data with you real quickly. We rely heavily on the federal government today, which some states don't anymore, but Georgia still leans heavily on the feds. And currently we get about $1.2 billion a year from the federal government for transportation. We spend about $1 billion of our own money here in Georgia on transportation. So we're spending more federal money than we are state money to help deliver the goods. So we've got to wean ourselves away from that, and that's going to be a challenge for us. We don't know what the future holds for federal funding. As you all know, and you read in the newspapers or on your iPads, the federal government's in disarray. They can't make decisions. They can't pass bills. The president hasn't had a lot of bills to even sign this year. There's 300 bills on the House calendar that's passed, and the Senate hasn't passed any of them. So there's a disconnect in Washington. So we don't know what the future holds for funding. We do know this. They extended the federal funding for all DOTs in the country until about May of next year. After May of next year, we don't know what happens. So the Congress is going to have to go back to work in January, hopefully under a new leadership, and we're going to have to try to find a solution to continue to fund these state projects. There's not enough money to go around the state. There's not enough money to go around our country. So that's a challenge. So we're looking at how do we best find the monies to fix our problems and not rely so much on the federal government. And usually that means money and taxes. Nobody wants to raise taxes. Nobody wants to pay more out of their pocket to give to the government. There's a lot of reasons for that. One, you want to keep your money in your pocket. You don't trust the government to spend your money. You want to be able to make decisions on your own. So we have a lot of issues that we're going to have to address in the next session. And so during our discussions, we've talked about how do we get $1 billion or $2 billion a year for the next 20 or 30 years to fix some of the needs that the DOT has identified. One way we're looking at is an extra sales tax that would be applied to all goods and services that are bought in Georgia. There'll be some exemptions to that and exceptions like there always are. Other ideas have been toll roads. You see tolls on Interstate 85, the hot lanes that you probably are familiar with. There's other projects that are under construction right now. Interstate 75 and 575 are currently under contract to be constructed reverse manageable lanes. So what that technically means is you'll be coming into Atlanta in the mornings, coming south on 2 new lanes, and then in the afternoon, the traffic flow will reverse and you'll go back out and you'll go northbound in the afternoon. That'll be a toll lane. You will not be able to ride on that for free. You'll have to have a peach pass like you do on 85 hot lanes, and so you'll have to pay a variable tolling on that. That price could be as low as maybe $1 up to $5 or $6 or $7, depending on the traffic and the congestion at the time. So those are some other ideas that are being tossed around. Big projects on our downtown streets. I can talk about Interstate 285 and Georgia 400. There's a big interchange project that's under construction, under design work right now. It's going to be roughly $800 million, I believe, that the DOT is going to fund. $800 million is almost 80% of what the state pays in an entire year for the whole state. So we can't afford to have too many of those projects laying around, can we? We've got $1 billion a year in our budget, and we're gonna spend $800 million on one interchange. That doesn't leave much to go around. We have debt service that we're paying out of the DOT's budget, roughly 25–30% of the state budget, and DOT goes to their debt service to pay for projects that were built years ago. About a third of the money in the budget goes to operations and maintenance. So when you look at the bottom line, there's only about $300 million that's being used for capital construction around the state. We have a list of billions of dollars of needs in projects. The DOT has identified where the major issues are and where can we get the biggest bang for our buck. So our goal in our committee this year is to find approximately $1 billion a year into the foreseeable future. 10, 15, 20, 30 years into the future. And so our job is going to be a tough one. You mix politics in with all the policy stuff, and it's going to be fun. So I encourage you to come and get involved in that and pay attention and give us input. Now, you guys you're more on the engineering side and the design side. We get it. We know that the projects are needed, and we're going to have to find the money to help the DOT and allow them to do their job. So it's going to be interesting. Let me talk a little bit about the fuel tax in Georgia. Most of you probably go and you buy gas in your cars. You pump gas. This week it can fluctuate from $2.46 in Ringo to, that's where I filled up Tuesday, and I just filled up again this morning. I paid $2.84 in Dawsonville. So there's about a 40-cent swing on that. People are like, how can gas swing from that price point back and forth? We don't have a real answer for that. I don't, because it's more of a private sector issue. People set the gas prices based on what they're paying for it at the rack. Whenever the wholesalers come in Georgia and deliver it, they sell it to these gas stations. The government doesn't control that, but we do tax it. Every gallon of gas that you put in your car, you're paying federal tax and state tax and local tax on that gasoline. And I can give you some numbers there. For every gallon of gas you pump, you're paying 18 cents per gallon to the federal government. Every gallon of gas, you pay 18 cents to the federal government. There's also a state excise tax, and that's 7.5 cents per gallon. For every gallon of gas you pump, 7.5 cents goes to the state. And then there's a state sales tax that's on top of that, and that's your 7% sales tax if you live in a county that levies a 7% sales tax. 4% of that goes to the state, and then the other 3 typically goes to your schools or your counties or your cities. And you've heard of ELOST, SPLOST, and LOST. Those are your 3% sales taxes on the local level. So if you add all that up on a $3 gas price range, that's roughly 40 and 50 cents a gallon of gas. So that's a lot of money, but you think it's high, but we're really not. We're in the middle. If you look at all the states around us, we're sort of in the middle on that collection. We used to be one of the lowest, but we're probably in the middle because gas prices have gone up over the last 10 years. So we're looking to reformat that. Instead of having the fluctuation of the prices going up and down based on the sales tax, we're looking at changing that to a straight excise tax. Get rid of the 7% or the 4% state sales tax and charge just a flat excise tax. What that does for us, it creates consistency and reliability. So the DOT knows from year to year how much to budget based on historical trends. We don't have to worry as much about the price of gasoline going up or down. We can sort of trend that out, and we can predict what the gas sales are going to be next year based on the last 2 or 3 years. So that's another option we're looking at. We talk about green energy, and we can talk about electric cars and hybrids. A lot of people are buying electric cars today, and part of that is based on the policy decisions that are made at the Capitol in Georgia and also in Washington. You may or may not know that you can go to a car lot today in Georgia and buy an electric vehicle, whether it's a Nissan Leaf or a Prius or what is that, Tesla? It's about $120,000. Anybody in here driving a Tesla? Natalie, are you driving a Tesla? Anyway, you can buy a new car today, or you can lease a car today, believe it or not, and the federal government will give you a $7,500 tax credit, and the state of Georgia will give you a $5,000 tax credit. Now, that's an amazing incentive, and everybody says, why are they doing that? Policymakers and legislators and people in Washington are trying to get people to buy more fuel-efficient vehicles. So they're creating tax incentives to do that. Well, what is the problem with that? What's the downside of that?
No gas.
All right, so we talked about gas tax a few minutes ago, right? 40-something cents a gallon. Well, if you're not buying gasoline, but you're still driving up down our roads, who's paying to fix that road? The person that's using it normally would pay. But if you're driving an electric car, you're not paying any gas tax because you're charging your car at home with electricity. You get in the car and you go 20 miles or 30 miles to work, you come home, you pay zero tax to the DOT. If enough people do that, eventually we're going to run out of money. So other states have been looking at this problem. We've seen policies change in Oregon and other places. They're studying it. There's a VMT policy that's been implemented, vehicle miles traveled. And that's where you would actually pay so many cents per mile if you're driving an electric car or maybe even a gas car. You could eliminate the gas tax completely, convert your fee system or your tax system to a VMT, and some states have a 1.5 cent per mile fee on that. And up in Oregon, we talked to Verizon Wireless. They actually have a contract with State Farm Insurance to where they're tracking how many miles you're traveling in your car because there's a computer chip already built into that car. They're basically transponding that information from your car to a cell tower, which is being logged into State Farm's insurance server in their database, and they're actually sending bills to the drivers on a quarterly or monthly basis with basically an invoice. Okay, you drove 1,000 miles last month, you owe us 1.5 cents per mile for that 1,000 miles. So that's another concept we're looking at. Now, there's a lot of politics that goes along with that. People don't want the big government in their driver's seat. They don't want the feds or the state or the local governments to know where they've been or how much they've been traveling. These smart systems are amazing. They know where you're traveling. They know what state you're in. They can divert the money from Georgia to Alabama to Tennessee or wherever you are. These systems can track you and they know exactly where you are and how fast you're driving. It's amazing the technology that's offered these alternatives. So we're going to look at all of these options. There's no silver bullet here. We're not going to say, okay, the answer is just to raise gas tax to 80 cents a gallon because we don't think politically we would ever live through that. So we may have a combination of 4 or 5 of these methods, and we're going to put them on the table, and we'll draft a piece of legislation. It'll go through a committee process. It'll have to be voted on by the committee. Then it'll go to the Senate, and it'll go to the full chamber of the House. And if we get a majority vote from both bodies in the bill, would go to the governor's desk. So we're in the early stages of drafting legislation. I can't tell you what that's going to look like. Nobody on the committee can, because we're still in the process of gathering more data and more facts and more concepts and more ideas. So I'd say stay tuned. There's going to be a lot of debate on that over the next few months, and you'll be hearing about it in the news. Just a little bit of information I've gotten from some of my people back home. People are already griping. Oh, we hear you're going to raise gas taxes. Well, so you're already starting getting opposition to it. So that's where the pressure starts coming on politicians to not raise their taxes. So what do? What's the answer? If we only collect $1 billion a year right now for the state, and we need to increase that to $2 billion, sounds like you're going to raise taxes somewhere, doesn't it? It doesn't sound good. So there are some reallocation measures in the works. We're looking at how do we reallocate some of the monies that are in the state budget. The 4% I told you about earlier, you have the 7% sales tax, 4% goes to the state, 3% goes to the locals. Out of that 4%, 3% of it is dedicated solely to the DOT, but the fourth penny, however, has been, I guess you could say, raided about 15 or 20 years ago, and that money was shifted over to the general fund of the state to help balance the budget. So we're trying to pull that fourth penny back out of the general fund and put it back in the DOT. That equates to almost $200 million, depending on who you get to estimate that number. We've been told as low as 180 or as much as 220 million. So there's 200 million of it right there. So we're 20% of the way there. We're talking about a sales tax, possibility of increasing sales tax to 8% across the state and roll back the income tax 0.5%. So that may sound like that doesn't help you any, but it really would. A 1% sales tax in Georgia would increase revenue about $1.4 billion. But if we roll back the half penny of that on the income tax, and that would take away half of that, so we would be left with about a $700 million net. So if you take the 700 million and then you add the 200 million from the fourth penny, now you're getting close to $900 million. So we're almost there in theory. The problem is, do we have the votes to pass something like that in the state? It's not a definite thing. We have a real strong majority in Republicans in the House and the Senate. We have a super majority. We're going to have to work hard, and we're going to have to look at, what does it take to get the people convinced that this is the year that we need to do something. This isn't something that we want to do every year. We don't want to keep talking about funding every year. We want to do something now that's going to work into the next 20 or 30 years. So I'm going to stop at this point, and I'm going to get some input from you guys, and I know you may have some questions, and my friends at the DOT can correct me on any of my numbers that I may have missed on. So, questions or comments?
I know Georgia, with all the federal and state incentives to buy electric vehicles, we were the #1 Nissan Leaf seller. Do you have any idea what percentage of vehicles in Georgia are actually electric, being that you want to start adding this tax per mile?
I don't have the exact number, but I can tell you that it's a very small number compared to the millions of cars that are on the road today. But the problem is, you don't want to wait until there's 1 million drivers on the road with Leafs or Priuses, or these real high efficiency vehicles. So we want to do it now. We want to get a policy in place, and the policy right now we're looking at is add a $100 a year registration fee to every electric vehicle. So when you go to the tag office in your county and you pay that $20 tag fee, then you would actually add a $100 fee to it, and it would be the equivalence of what you would pay in your state or your federal road tax for that year if you were driving a normal car. Now these electric cars normally don't go long ranges. That's one of the problems with an electric car. They have a short range. You get to work and you come home and you charge it again. You can't go out on a road trip and go 400 miles on them yet. The technology is getting better. So we want to get a policy in place now. Virginia put a $64 fee in about a year or two ago, and it wasn't politically viable, so they repealed it. And so we're looking at $100 for a personal vehicle and $200 per year for a commercial vehicle. Again, it's just an idea. I don't know if it's going to stick or not. Ma'am?
I was curious how the meetings went in the regions that passed TIA, what kind of feedback you got?
That's a good question. Obviously, you guys know about the T-SPOS that passed. About 4 years ago, I was elected to the Senate, so that bill passed before I got there, but it allowed regions of the state to impose a sales tax on themselves. So the state is broken into roughly 14 regions or 15 regions called regional commissions. And here in Atlanta, you have the ARC, the Atlanta Regional Commission. Where I live, we're in the Georgia Mountain Regional Commission. And so there's about 12 or 14 counties in that region, from Forsyth County on the south end all the way up to Hall County and Raven County and Union towns down toward Elberton and toward Athens and back across. So there's a big block of counties that had a lot of different needs. And so Forsyth County is more than a metropolitan type area, with Georgia 400 being right here close to Fulton County. So their needs are a lot different than the people up in the mountains in Clayton and Raven County. They didn't see the need to increase their own taxes. They didn't trust that the money would ever be spent there. They thought the money would be shifted to Atlanta. And over in Cobb County and Cherokee County, there were a lot of the voters over there were afraid that that money that they would spend would go to Atlanta, maybe to MARTA and public transit systems they didn't want. So that was a big failure for the most part. Now, there were 3 regions in the state that passed it, and they're more in the middle of the state, and they've done successful things already in the 3 years they've been collecting that money. There's a lot of big projects that are under construction, and so they're moving the needle on congestion relief and repair and maintenance of the roads and highways and bridges. So we looked at all that. When we did our statewide tour, we heard from a lot of the local governments. They were very happy with the results of that 1% sales tax. Now you might ask, why don't we just go back and try to revote that in? We don't believe that in the regions that it failed that you would be successful if you did that again. So we're going to try a different approach. Now another approach that I didn't mention was, instead of a statewide sales tax, we may have a multi-county sales tax where 1 or more counties could get together and say, okay, Hall County and Gwinnett County and Forsyth County, the three of those counties have a lot in common. They have some major roads that come through their communities going from Georgia 400 over to 85 or 985. Maybe the three of those counties could come together and vote themselves a sales tax and spend the money just on those projects. And we just saw that in last week's election with Forsyth County. They voted themselves a $200 million bond referendum, and they decided to spend $200 million of their own money, leverage that with some state DOT funds and some federal funds, and fix their own problems. So they're going to spend $200 million over the next few years, and they're going to widen Georgia 400 and State Route 20 and 141 and 369. All of these state routes that are actually in Forsyth County, they're not going to wait for us at the state to do it. They're going to take the matter in their own hands, and they're going to put their own money in there. They're going to get it done. So it told us that they didn't like the approach of the T-SPLOS. They didn't like the regional approach, but they like having their own decision making, and they want to spend their own money on their own problems. So then you had Cobb County that just renewed their SPLOS last week for part of the Braves projects and the road improvements over there. And you had Clayton County, just not far from here, that voted to increase their sales tax to put MARTA into the community. So they're going to expand MARTA into Clayton County. Again, one county voted to tax themselves to fix their own problems. I think that has more merit to it than trying to go back to this multi-regional approach. Good question. Yes, sir.
Is there a reason why Georgia then put the ceiling on the amount of taxes, for instance, 4% in the metro Atlanta region and 3% elsewhere? Why not let local jurisdictions just tax themselves whatever region they want?
Well, and not to get too political, but if you don't have a cap, then where do you stop? You know, some communities may just keep taxing themselves out of existence. I mean, you get to a point where people won't want to move there. Companies not going to move to a community that has a 10 or 12% sales tax when the county beside them has an 8% sales tax. So the state has to be uniform. We have the Constitution that has limits on it, and we have a limit now on the amount of income tax we can charge. That was a referendum last week in the ballot. That's a constitutional amendment. So the state of Georgia, before that, the legislature could just raise income taxes. We could go from 6% to 8% if we had the courage to do it. But now there's a constitutional limit. There's a ceiling of 6%. We can lower it, but we can't raise it beyond 6%. And that's because of political will. People want to control spending. They want less government in their life. They don't want to see people waste money. I mean, you ask 100 people on the streets of Atlanta, do you think the federal government runs an efficient government? How many would say yes? Very few. So there's a trust factor. People don't believe they're getting their money's worth when they pay their taxes today. So we've got to continue to look to make better use of our dollars, and it's hard. That's a tough job. Yes, sir.
Naive question, I guess. Today, are any revenues generated from the sale of electricity apportioned to transportation? And is that, because it's just like fuel for an electric car?
Yeah, I think all of your sales tax money goes to your local and state governments on electricity. I'm not aware of any dollars that goes to the DOT. In fact, the Constitution mandates that all motor fuel tax monies collected in the state goes strictly to the DOT. I don't know of any other provision in state law that allows us to charge for dedicated revenues. Now, we could take money out of the general fund and allocate it to the DOT, but then we're taking money away from education and public safety and, you know, the prison systems and so forth and so on. But as of right now, I'm not aware of any dollars from the sale of electricity. Yes, sir.
I noticed you didn't mention privatization or public-private at all in that. Is that a viable solution to look at?
Yeah, I think it's the trend of the future. If you look at the projects that I mentioned, 75 and 575, that's a P3 project, public-private partnership, and then 75 South, is that a P3, Natalie?
I know 285, 400 will be P3, and yeah.
So you'll see more and more P3s, and that's where the tolling component's going to come into play. That's how they'll get their money back in their investment. So yes, I think P3s are a definite must. We've passed legislation in the last couple of years to help enable that and encourage it. We're very favorable to the P3 concept and the tolling concept. But I'm a big believer that the tolling should only be on new construction and new capacity. I do not believe we should toll existing lanes. politically, people were gonna argue that they've already paid for that once. It's already been built with their tax dollars that they're already paid. They shouldn't have to come back and put a toll on an existing roadway. And that was one of the arguments on the Georgia 400 toll that was taken down a couple of years ago. People felt like the toll was put in place to pay for the new road coming into Atlanta when 400 was extended. The promise was made to the city of Atlanta that once that bond was paid off, that toll would be torn down. The governor made the commitment in his campaign, and once that was paid off, then they tore it down. Now, going forward in the future, we add more lanes on Georgia 400, I would expect there'll be some tolling involved with that. And I'd be more than glad to pay it if I can get home quicker. I went to Gainesville last night after I left the Capitol, took Interstate 85, there was bumper to bumper, just dead stop traffic. I got in the hot lane, and still it wasn't very fast, but it sure beat being back there 2 or 3 miles. You know, so I paid about $6 to get to Gainesville because I was in a hurry. I was late for another meeting. So people are willing to pay if their time's worth it. Quality of life is a major concern for us. We've got to continue to look for ways to recruit good industry here and good jobs. And if companies don't believe that their people can get to and from work and get to their homes and get to ball games and get to church, they're simply not going to continue to come to Georgia. We're going to have a problem with retaining companies in Georgia if we can't provide good transportation solutions. Other questions? Yes, sir.
So I understand that GDOT recently abandoned plans to turn HOV lanes on the downtown connector and 75 and 85 in the perimeter to HOVs. And I'm wondering, like, have you thought of alternatives to try to keep those lanes free flowing, knowing that they get congested during rush hour?
That's really a DOT policy issue, and I don't know if they're moving toward converting those to hot lanes or not, but I haven't heard that. And they were built with federal dollars. A lot of times when you build a project with federal dollars, you're tied to that for years, just like the hot lane was built with, is it $80 or $90 million we got federal money for the hot lanes on 85, so we're sort of stuck with that. It was more of a pilot project, but it seems to be working. I haven't heard any reason to think that it's not. You know, at one time we were talking about a tunnel under Atlanta. I don't know if that's still in the works or not, but talking about an engineering project, that would be a good one for you guys to get involved with, just to avoid all the right-of-way acquisition and the environmental costs. But that'd be a huge cost too, to tunnel under the city of Atlanta and come back out. But you know, sometime back decades ago, when you engineers designed Interstate 75 and 85 to come together in Atlanta, that may have been a good decision back then, but it's not a good one today. So I guess it was probably some politician that said, let's put these two roads together and we'll bring all these jobs to this area. Probably needed it. We need more roads, honestly. I think we need more highways around Atlanta. We need to look at roads across the top of the state from 75 to 85 and try to get people out of Atlanta. Truck traffic that's coming through Georgia that doesn't need to come to Atlanta, we need to find every way possible to keep them from coming through here. And it's clogging up our roads. So it's tough. You're out there on these roads more than I am every day. I come down once or twice a week, but it's not too bad up in Delaware. Yes, sir, in the back.
And so to that point with trucks and moving industry, at the beginning of your speech you mentioned we have a lot of rail lines and you have the large Savannah port deepening. Is there any kind of special attention looked at that and ways to find alternatives to kind of road?
There's actually work being done to enhance the rail that's coming out of Savannah. There's also some more road projects under construction. Buddy Deloach Parkway is being developed and built. You know, when you get more traffic and more congestion, you've got to keep spending money on infrastructure and invest in your roads and your rails, and that's what we're seeing. Most of the rail in Georgia, the class ones are owned privately, so the state doesn't have any investment in that. That's done with private dollars, so we need to help create incentives so they'll keep investing in that.
Maybe one more question?
Yes, sir.
If we raise revenues, will we be able to use it for other than roads and bridges?
That is a possibility. Right now, the Constitution says all motor fuel tax monies are dedicated to roads and bridges. Now, if we raise money through sales tax on goods and services, then you can allocate that money for public transit projects. And we're constantly, especially here in Atlanta, listening to Keith Parker at MARTA, and we're looking at the job that he's done. He's been fantastic, and he's turned that operation around in the last 2 years, done a fantastic job. We've got to continue to look for ways to expand our public transit systems. We're seeing trends. People your age are moving into the cities like Atlanta and so forth. You're getting rid of your cars. You don't want to own houses. We've looked at it. I was out at Google back in the summer, and 15,000 people on that campus. Most of them don't want to own a house. They don't want to own a car. They'll rent a car on the weekends if they want to go somewhere because Google provides their transportation to and from work for them. Pretty amazing. So yeah, we're going to have to do more in public transit. Now, public transit doesn't necessarily mean rail. It could be more buses. It could be other alternatives. But everybody in Atlanta doesn't need to own a SUV or a big truck to drive back and forth to work either. We've been spoiled over the years. Everybody loves their car. And everybody drives by themselves. You can see it going up and down the road. We've got to change our lifestyles and our habits. Younger people are doing that. And so we're being forced now to follow their trends and try to make better policy decisions to help enable that. So I'm encouraged by that. But up in the rural areas, you don't have that opportunity. You can't afford to build public transit systems for those less dense areas. But here in Atlanta, no question, we've got to do it.
Great, well, kind of close this out here. Just wanted to thank Dr. Hunter and Audrey again for putting together this seminar. My name is Casey Altman. I work with Dean Sheehan in government relations here and have the pleasure of working with Senator Gooch at the Capitol and all of his colleagues in the Senate and House, and just wanted to thank all of you all for your interest in this subject and policy, and wanted to take just a quick minute to let you know that there are internship opportunities if you are an undergrad or graduate student to go down and work at the Capitol. So if this is something that you're really interested in pursuing further, talk to our office. We're always open to meet with students and talk about the opportunities. We have, I'm going to call them out really quick, 2 future interns sitting in the back. Wave everybody. But yes, Rachel and Matthew are going to be 2 of the interns that are working this upcoming legislative session at the Capitol. So they're representing Georgia Tech, and I'm sure we'll do a great job. We have great confidence in them and always have great, smart students that go down there. We just need more students to fill the request. So if anyone's interested in some of those opportunities, please chat with us. So with that, anything else, Dr.
Thank you again so much for coming. Certainly appreciate it.